The fuel farm went up first. A column of orange fire punched through the coastal darkness and rose 200 feet into the Black Sea night sky. Then the secondary detonation hit, stored ordnance catching the cascade of heat, and the shockwave rolled across the tarmac hard enough to shatter windows in the base operations building 300 meters away. For the Russian air defense crews manning radar consoles along the coast, the first sign that anything had gone wrong wasn't an alarm. It was the light. By the time the first alert reached the duty officer, the helicopter base near the Sea of Azov was already burning. The drones had done their work, and the southern front would never look quite the same. I'm your host at Ukraine Battlefront, where we analyze the battles that change wars. Tonight we're going deep on one of the most technically sophisticated long-range drone operations Ukraine has executed against Russian aviation infrastructure. A coordinated strike package that crossed open water, navigated layered coastal air defenses, and turned a heavily protected Russian rotary wing base into a burning liability. This is the story of how Ukrainian operators mapped a blind arc in Russia's radar coverage, built a strike package to exploit it, and reshaped the tempo of the southern front in a single night. Stay close. The planning phase alone is a masterclass in modern warfare. To understand what Ukrainian operators pulled off against this base, you need to understand what the base actually was. Not just an airfield, a weapons system unto itself. Russian attack helicopter doctrine in the southern theater relied on what planners called the rotating hammer concept. Groups of Ka-52, Alligator, and Mi-28N Night Hunter helicopters would sortie from this coastal installation in coordinated waves, flying low along pre-planned routes to engage Ukrainian armor concentrations near the front. The Ka-52 carries a mix of Vickers anti-tank missiles and unguided rocket pods, effective against anything that moves in the open. The pilots averaged 4 to 6 sorties per operational day during peak offensive pushes. From this single base, Russian aviation had supported assault operations across a significant stretch of the southern front. Satellite imagery confirmed the facility held between 18 and 24 rotary wing frames at any given time. The support infrastructure included hardened revetments for aircraft storage, a dedicated fuel farm capable of holding several 100,000 liters of aviation fuel, a forward arming and refueling point that let aircraft cycle without returning to rear area logistics, hubs, and a small command and intelligence cell that coordinated flight schedules with ground force commanders. This was not a marginal target. Destroying this base, or even degrading its operational capacity, would create an aviation gap over the southern front that Russian forces could not quickly fill. The nearest comparable facility was far enough away that sortie rates would drop sharply. Aircraft would need to fly longer distances to reach operational areas, carrying less fuel for loitering, less payload, less combat effectiveness. Ukrainian military intelligence knew all of this. They had been watching the base for months. The planning began with a fundamental problem that had blocked previous targeting cycles. The base sat inside what Russian planners considered an impenetrable air defense bubble. The coastal air defense architecture protecting this portion of Russian-controlled territory was built in overlapping layers. An outer ring of radar coverage swept the entire northern coastline of the Sea of Azov, optimized to detect incoming aircraft or large drones flying conventional approach vectors. Inside that, medium-range surface-to-air missile systems provided intercept capability against threats that penetrated the outer detection ring. Closer still, short-range systems and electronic warfare assets provided terminal defense. On paper, nothing should get through. Russian commanders had briefed exactly this point to visiting inspection teams multiple times. The vulnerability was invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. Which weapon platform would you say was most decisive in making this operation possible? A. Long-range drone airframes. B. Electronic warfare support. C. Pre-strike satellite reconnaissance? Drop your answer in the comments. We'll revisit this at the end. Ukrainian electronic intelligence teams had been compiling data on the coastal radar network for months, triangulating emissions, signatures, mapping coverage arcs, correlating patrol aircraft schedules with radar activation patterns. The work was painstaking. For 12 weeks, collection assets monitored the network without taking any action that might alert Russian technicians to the interest. What emerged was a picture of a radar architecture that was almost airtight. Almost. Every radar system has a coverage geometry defined by its antenna height, its tilt angle, and its rotation rate. Where two adjacent radar systems were supposed to provide overlapping coverage, a subtle misalignment had created a narrow corridor, perhaps 8 to 12 degrees of azimuth, where coverage dropped to minimal effective altitude. A drone flying below a certain height through that corridor would be radar invisible. The corridor was narrow. It required precise navigation. But it existed, and it pointed almost directly at the base's fuel farm. The obstacle came 3 weeks before the operation was scheduled to launch. One of the primary navigation waypoints for the ingress corridor sat in an area where Russian electronic warfare systems were intermittently active. The jamming pattern wasn't predictable. It appeared to cycle on irregular schedules, possibly tied to specific patrol activities or alert states. If the drones hit that jamming window at the wrong moment, they would lose their navigation reference and scatter. The operators went back to the technical team. The solution took 11 days to develop. A redundant navigation architecture using a combination of preloaded terrain-following data and inertial reference, allowing each drone to continue its programmed flight path even during complete GPS denial windows lasting up to 40 minutes. 11 days of engineering work. Potentially the most important 11 days of the entire operation. Stay with me. What happens when the first drone crosses the outer radar ring will explain why this operation is being studied in military academies from Kyiv to London. The strike package Ukrainian operators eventually assembled was purpose-built for a specific tactical problem, not a large formation. Precision over mass. The primary strike elements were long-range, fixed-wing drones carrying warheads sized for infrastructure targets, fuel storage, aircraft revetments, maintenance facilities. These were not small commercial derivative systems. The airframes used in deep strike operations against hardened targets at this range represent significant Ukrainian domestic development, incorporating composite construction for reduced radar signature, efficient power plants for extended endurance, and precision terminal guidance for accuracy against point targets. Supporting the primary strike elements was a secondary package of smaller, faster drones designed to saturate the terminal air defense systems. If Russian short-range air defense crews were tracking and engaging the suppression drones, their attention and their missile inventory would be divided. A saturated defender is a degraded defender. A small number of electronic warfare payloads would also accompany the package, emitting signals designed to confuse radar operators during the critical ingress window. The package would cross the Sea of Azov at low altitude on a flight profile that kept every airframe below the horizon of the compromised coastal radar. Total flight time from launch to target, approximately 2 hours and 40 minutes. The launch window was selected based on a specific operational condition. Ukrainian intelligence had identified that a scheduled maintenance cycle on one of the outer radar systems was anticipated, standard rotation for radar components. That maintenance window, if it occurred on schedule, would further degrade coverage precisely when the package would be transiting the outer detection ring. The window opened. The launch order went out. 14 drones lifted off from concealed positions and began their transit across open water. For the first 90 minutes, nothing happened from the Russian perspective. Radar screens showed the normal coastal clutter: fishing vessels, weather noise, the occasional surface contact from commercial traffic. The air picture was clean. The base conducted its normal pre-dawn activities: fuel truck movements, a maintenance crew on one of the Ka-52 frames, the overnight duty watch in the operations building. The suppression element hit the outer detection zone first. Russian radar operators at a coastal station registered what appeared to be a small, ambiguous contact, the kind of return that appears periodically and usually resolves as noise or a bird flock. Standard procedure called for one verification sweep before alerting. The operator began the verification. The contact multiplied, not gradually. In the span of a single radar rotation, the picture went from one ambiguous return to 7 distinct tracks, all inbound, all low altitude, all moving at consistent velocities that didn't match any registered civilian traffic pattern. The alert went out. The Air Defense Control Center began sequencing intercept procedures, which is exactly when the primary strike elements, flying the silent ingress corridor that Russian planners had never identified, crossed the inner coastal boundary completely undetected. How many helicopter frames do you think Ukrainian intelligence assessed as destroyed or severely damaged in this operation? A 6B-11 C-17? The answer comes at the end of this video. Russian short-range air defense crews responded professionally to the suppression element. Radar slewed toward the incoming tracks. Missile launchers came online. The duty officer at the base was notified. Ground crew began dispersal procedures for the aircraft on the apron. 3 of the suppression drones were engaged and downed before they reached terminal range. The air defense crews began to believe they had the situation contained. The track count was falling as intercepts connected. The fuel farm detonated at 3:17 a.m. The primary strike element had threaded the gap, navigated across open water for 2 hours and 40 minutes, and put its first warhead directly into the base's primary aviation fuel storage. The fireball was visible from the coastline 8 kilometers away. Secondary explosions followed within 90 seconds as the fire reached stored ordnance in a forward arming point adjacent to the fuel farm. The blast radius from the secondary detonation was large enough to damage 2 Ka-52 frames positioned in nearby revetments, tearing rotor components from one and shredding the engine nacelles of the other. The operations building lost power. Emergency generators came online, but the communications node had taken a fragment hit from the secondary blast. For 11 critical minutes, the base commander was unable to reach higher command to report status. In those 11 minutes, the remaining strike drones completed their targeting sequence. A hardened revetment holding 3 additional Ka-52 frames took a direct hit, the warhead penetrating the earthen berm and detonating inside the protected space. The revetment was designed to protect aircraft from external blast effects. It was not designed to contain an internal detonation. Satellite imagery analyzed in the hours after the strike showed the revetment structure collapsed inward. The forward arming and refueling point was struck twice. The second impact hit a fuel bowser staged for the morning's first sortie cycle. The explosion added another column of fire to the growing inferno. A maintenance hangar on the eastern edge of the facility took a direct hit to its roof. Inside, according to Ukrainian intelligence assessments, at least 2 aircraft had been undergoing maintenance work that would have kept them grounded for the coming operational period. Both were destroyed before they could return to service. The final strike elements targeted the air defense radar infrastructure protecting the base perimeter. 2 of these strikes connected, destroying a search radar and damaging a fire control radar. Russian air defense capability over the burning base was now operating at severely degraded capacity precisely when it was most needed. Subscribe to Ukraine Battlefront if you want to understand how modern warfare actually works. Because what happens next in the aftermath assessment is where the real strategic lesson lives. The base commander reached higher command at approximately 3:28 a.m., 11 minutes after the first strike, and with the facility still actively burning. The communication log, partially recovered and analyzed by Ukrainian intelligence through subsequent operations, reflects controlled desperation. The commander reported aircraft destroyed. Multiple frames, exact count unknown in the immediate chaos. Fuel farm completely destroyed. Arming point destroyed. Radar infrastructure partially destroyed. Casualties among ground crew, severity unknown. Higher Command's response, according to the analysis, focused on 2 immediate priorities, accounting for aircraft that might be airworthy and could be dispersed to alternative locations, and requesting fire suppression support from the nearest Russian military facility capable of providing it. The fire suppression support took over 3 hours to arrive in effective quantity. By then, the fires that were going to be controlled had burned themselves out, and the fires that were going to destroy infrastructure had finished that work. Dawn revealed the full scale of the damage. Satellite imagery captured in the hours after the strike and analyzed by open-source intelligence teams showed a facility that was, in operational terms, catastrophically degraded. The fuel farm was a field of blackened concrete and melted steel piping. The forward arming point was a debris field. The maintenance hangar had partially collapsed. The revetment system that Russian planners had cited as a key survivability feature had protected some aircraft from external blast but failed completely against precision internal strikes. The aircraft loss count, as assessed by multiple independent satellite imagery analysts and cross-referenced against Ukrainian General Staff reports, came to 11 frames destroyed or so severely damaged as to be non-recoverable in the near term, with an additional 4 assessed as damaged but potentially repairable. This was a significant fraction of the total rotary wing strength based at the facility. What do you think? Was the decision to concentrate this many helicopter frames at a single coastal facility a strategic miscalculation, or was it operationally necessary given the tempo of Southern Front operations? That's a genuine question worth thinking about. Drop your analysis in the comments. The dollar value of the destroyed aircraft alone ran into the hundreds of millions. Ka-52 production costs are not publicly disclosed with precision, but independent assessments put individual frames in the range of $15 to $16 million. 11 frames destroyed at that unit cost means the strike achieved aircraft destruction worth somewhere between $160 and $175 million in Russian military aviation assets. Add the infrastructure: fuel farm, arming point, radar systems, maintenance hangar, and the total facility value destroyed in a single night exceeded $200 million. The cost of the Ukrainian strike package, a fraction of that figure. Ukrainian officials have not disclosed precise costs for the drone systems used in deep strike operations, but comparable fixed-wing long-range drone systems are estimated at considerably less than $1 million per airframe. The entire package, including the suppression elements and electronic warfare payloads, almost certainly cost less than $10 million to execute. That return on investment ratio forces both sides to rethink how they approach air defense and aviation basing strategy. If you believe precision changes wars more than mass, type Ukraine battlefront in the comments. The strategic impact on the Southern Front began showing within days of the strike. Russian attack helicopter sortie rates over the southern sector dropped sharply. The aircraft that had been based at this facility were gone or unavailable. Replacement aircraft, if they existed in the regional pool, would need time to relocate and integrate with ground force coordination networks. Ground forces that had relied on rotary wing aviation support for their assault operations found themselves without that support during a critical operational period. Ukrainian ground commanders reported in the period following the strike that armored formations were moving with measurably less rotary wing harassment than they had experienced in the previous weeks. Anti-tank helicopter strikes had been a consistent source of Ukrainian armor losses in the preceding operational period. That pressure was largely absent in the immediate aftermath. The change in tempo was significant enough that Russian commanders accelerated attempts to move replacement aircraft from other theaters. These movements created targeting opportunities of their own, as aircraft in transit through exposed intermediate staging locations were more vulnerable than aircraft at defended permanent bases. Ukrainian drone operators tracked at least 2 such transit movements and attempted follow-on strikes. Whether those strikes succeeded is not fully confirmed by available open-source data, but the disruption to the Russian aviation logistics cycle was real and measurable. The obstacle that complicated follow-on operations was an unexpected shift in Russian electronic warfare posture. Following the base strike, Russian technical teams deployed additional jamming assets across the southern coastal zone, apparently attempting to close whatever gap the Ukrainian operators had exploited. Jamming coverage increased significantly in the days after the strike. Ukrainian operators adjusted. The same redundant navigation architecture developed to handle intermittent jamming during the original strike provided resilience against the denser jamming environment. Follow-on operations in the region continued, though at modified flight profiles. The Russian postmortem on this operation, and there would certainly have been one, faced an uncomfortable set of conclusions. The radar gap that Ukrainian operators exploited was not the result of negligence in the conventional sense. It was a system integration problem that only became visible when an adversary with precise electromagnetic mapping capability specifically searched for it. The Russian coastal defense architecture had been designed and installed over multiple procurement cycles, with different systems from different manufacturers integrated by different technical teams at different times. The gap wasn't planned. It accumulated. The lesson is architectural. Air defense systems with predictable coverage geometry will be exploited by adversaries with sufficient time and intelligence capability to study them. Ukraine had both. The Russian assumption that geographic depth and layered coverage equaled invulnerability was tested and found incorrect. For Ukrainian operators, the operation demonstrated that deep strike capability against high-value aviation targets was achievable against defended positions. If the intelligence preparation was thorough enough and the technical solutions were sophisticated enough, the months of electromagnetic reconnaissance, the 11 days of engineering work on the navigation redundancy, the precise selection of the launch window, all of it was necessary. Skip any piece of that preparation and the operation fails. Innovation is not improvisation. This strike was planned down to the degree arc. Now, the answer to our quiz from earlier. How many helicopter frames did Ukrainian intelligence assess as destroyed or severely damaged? The answer is B, 11. 11 Ka-52 and Mi-28N frames destroyed or rendered non-recoverable, with 4 additional frames assessed as damaged but potentially repairable. The figure comes from cross-reference satellite imagery analysis conducted by independent open-source intelligence teams, corroborated by Ukrainian General Staff reporting. Some Russian-sourced information suggests lower figures, but the physical evidence visible in post-strike satellite imagery, collapsed revetments, destroyed fuel infrastructure, the debris field at the arming point, is consistent with the higher assessment. The 11 frames represent a significant degradation of Russian rotary wing attack capability in the southern theater. Replacements came eventually, but the gap period created operational conditions that Ukrainian ground forces exploited. 3 questions for your consideration. Was concentrating this many attack helicopters at a single coastal installation the right call for Russian commanders, given the base's apparent strategic value to Southern Front operations? Or did the concentration itself create a target worth the risk Ukraine took to strike it? Could the Russian air defense network have prevented this? Or was the combination of electromagnetic reconnaissance depth, navigation redundancy engineering, and suppression element design fundamentally more sophisticated than what the defense could counter? And what would you have done differently if you were the Ukrainian strike planner, looking at that radar gap for the first time? Subscribe to Ukraine Battlefront, because we break down the battles that textbooks will study for decades. The coastal air is quieter now near that base. The radar towers that once swept the Azov coastline are offline or degraded. The tarmac where Ka-52 frames used to queue for pre-dawn sortie cycles is cold. The revetments are rubble. Somewhere, Russian aviation commanders are rebuilding. Somewhere, Ukrainian drone operators are already watching the next facility. The calculus of deep strike versus fixed basing has permanently shifted in this war, and neither side can pretend otherwise. Real tactics, real consequences. Ukraine Battlefront.